Welcome to the Crawcast. I'm your host, George Krosek, and this is what happened in Week 10 of the NFL season. If you like this type of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button like it owes you money. The first game was the Baltimore Ravens versus the Cincinnati Bengals. The Ravens won 35-34. The Ravens' leading passer was Lamar Jackson, who had 290 passing yards and 4 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Derrick Henry, who had 68 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Tylan Wallace, who had 115 yards and a touchdown. And for the Bengals, their leading passer was Joe Burrow, who had 428 yards and 4 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Chase Brown, who had 42 rushing yards and a touchdown. Their leading receiver was Jamar Chase, who had 264 yards and 3 touchdowns. So this game was actually really, really good, and it kind of was almost identical to their last game. What happened was the Bengals marched down and scored a touchdown, and they went for 2, which I think was probably the best decision. Like, they're struggling to stop the Ravens' offense, and so rather than trying to last in overtime and hopefully win the coin toss, I think going for 2 is the right decision. But there was like 3 face mask penalties that just were not called, and I think that really screwed the Bengals. I'm not saying it would have made a difference, but that part just really screwed the Bengals. So where do we go from here? Obviously, the Ravens are really good, and the Bengals, they're at 4-6. Basically, you need to get 9-8. So they need to be 5-2 for the remaining games to make the playoffs, which I think is possible because they are a good team. They've just been losing close ones. And it is fine to me because I know nobody's talking about him like this, but I think Joe Burrow might need to be in the MVP conversation. I understand he's definitely behind Lamar Jackson, but even though he doesn't have the wins, he is still playing really, really well. The next game is the Carolina Panthers versus the New York Giants. The Panthers won 20-17. The Panthers' leading passer was Bryce Young, who had 126 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Chuba Hubbard, who had 153 yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Jalen Cocker, who had 41 receiving yards. And then for the Giants, their leading passer was Daniel Jones, who had 190 yards and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Tyrone Tracy Jr., who had 103 rushing yards and a touchdown, and their leading receiver was Wan'Dale Robinson, who had 51 receiving yards. So this game, neither team looked great. Bryce Young is looking better, and that's a promise. I understand he did not play great, but compared to how he was playing, feels a little bit night and day compared to that. And so he does deserve a lot of credit for playing better. And I think it was definitely way too early to give up on Bryce Young. And I'm not saying he is the future, but you just can't give up on the first overall pick after like hardly one season. And I think he shows too much potential for that. And so at least give him, another year or two to prove himself. And then the Giants, they need to get rid of Daniel Jones. Clearly not the answer. He's clearly holding this team back. And honestly, this team I don't even think is that bad. I think their defense is pretty good. I don't really like their offensive line, but Tyrone Tracy is good. Malik Nabers is good, even though he struggles with drops occasionally. I think Daniel Jones is really the one that's holding them back. So I think they do need to get rid of Daniel Jones. And because they built a decent team outside of Daniel Jones, I think they should keep Brian Daboll, who seems like a decent coach, and then I can't remember his name, but their general manager, I don't think the Giants should fire him. At least give him one more year without Daniel Jones. So overall, I think if you're the Panthers, you gotta be happy because it's at least looking promising. The next game is the New England Patriots versus the Chicago Bears. The Patriots won 19-3. The Patriots' leading passer is Drake May, who had 184 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Ramondre Stevenson, who had 74 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Austin Hooper, who had 64 receiving yards. And for the Bears, their leading passer was Caleb Williams, who had 120 passing yards. Their leading rusher was DeAndre Swift, who had 59 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Keenan Allen, who had 44 receiving yards. So for this game, Drake May is actually looking really good. He's been super impressive, and I think that kind of goes double for him in the sense that out of all the rookie quarterbacks, I think he's definitely in the worst situation. He does not have a wide receiver number 1. His offensive line is bad. And Jerod Mayo, I think he's an average coach and really hasn't shown anything much so far. And with Caleb Williams, he struggled a lot during this game. Drake May didn't play perfect, but like I said, I think he needs to be at least on a slightly different scale compared to the other rookie quarterbacks because of how bad his situation is. Whereas Caleb Williams, he's just playing bad. There's no real excuses for that. Matt Eberflus, I think he needs to get fired because the Bears were bad under Justin Fields when Matt Eberflus got hired. Now they're bad under Caleb Williams, and I like their defense. I think their defense is fairly decent, but their offense is just unsustainable and so unbelievably horrible right now. And I think that they need to just go in a different direction on the offense. But overall, Drake May has shown a lot of promise, and I think the Patriots need to be excited for that. The next game is the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Washington Commanders. The Steelers won 28-27. The Steelers' leading passer was Russell Wilson, who had 195 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Their leading rusher was Jaylen Warren, who had 66 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was George Pickens, who had 91 receiving yards and a touchdown. And for the Commanders, their leading passer is Jaden Daniels, who had 202 passing yards. Their leading rusher was Austin Ekeler, who had 44 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And their leading receiver is Terry McLaurin, who had 113 receiving yards. So overall, this game was pretty exciting. I think these are both really good teams. And honestly, Russell Wilson, I think it's a little bit deceiving because he's not playing that great. He's literally just chucking up to George Pickens and it's working, or chucking up to Mike Williams and it's working. And he's shown that he is able to throw the ball, because that was the issue of Justin Fields. Is Justin Fields was decent at running and wasn't making any mistakes, but he just couldn't throw the ball well, and that's kind of the issue their offense was running into. And the Steelers' defense is just really great. And then for the Commanders, you also have to be happy with this. Even though you did lose, Jaden Daniels is still looking like a stud, like the best rookie quarterback out of the draft class. And overall, you didn't play that bad, and maybe you should have won this game. It's tough to tell, but overall, I think both teams have to be very happy with this. The next game is the Buffalo Bills versus the Indianapolis Colts. The Bills won 30-20. The Bills' leading passer is Josh Allen, who had 280 yards and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher is James Cook, who had 80 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Matt Collins, who had 86 receiving yards. And then for the Colts, their leading passer was Joe Flacco, who had 272 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Jonathan Taylor, who had 114 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Alec Pierce, who had 4 catches for 81 yards and a touchdown. So in this game, neither team played that great. Honestly, Josh Allen threw 2 horrible interceptions. Joe Flacco threw 3 horrible interceptions. The running game was really good for the Bills, and I think the Bills just overall are the better team and won. With the Colts, I do think Joe Flacco does give you a better chance than Anthony Richardson, because at least Joe Flacco has shown that he can play well, complete games. Because look at the past 2 weeks he struggled, but he struggled against a really good Bills defense and a really great Vikings defense. And so I think right now you are looking at a shot at the playoffs, because Texans are not doing good at all, and you still have a shot at the division, and I think you at least want to try to win now, whereas Anthony Richardson doesn't give you an opportunity to do that. And I also don't think they should give up on Anthony Richardson. It's way too early in his career. He really hasn't played that much, and I think just you shouldn't give up on Anthony Richardson, but just bench him for the rest of the year until you're officially eliminated from the playoffs. The next game is the Minnesota Vikings versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Vikings won 12-7. The Vikings' leading passer is Sam Darnold, who had 241 passing yards and 3 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Aaron Jones, who had 88 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was TJ Hockenson, who had 72 receiving yards. And then for the Jaguars, their leading passer was Mac Jones, who had 111 passing yards and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Travis Etienne, who had 44 rushing yards. Their leading receiver was Evan Ingram, who had 40 receiving yards. This game was kind of terrible by both teams. I think it's a little bit misleading about the Vikings, though, because they were driving down the field and playing really well. It's just that Sam Darnold really tried to cost the game for them. He threw 3 horrible interceptions in the red zone, and he just felt like, I'm going to try to blow the game for us, just because he could. It kind of made no sense. Like, he really didn't need to try to force the balls there, but he did, and it just wasn't good throws. But the Vikings kind of got lucky enough that they survived. And then the Jaguars, it's kind of more bad news. It looks like Trevor Lawrence will probably be done for the year. So let's see what it goes with Mac Jones. Mac Jones really didn't look good at all. And with the Vikings, you just got to be happy that you're still in this. You still got a shot at the division. Even though you're not playing well, you still got a shot at the division and will probably make the playoffs. The next game is the Kansas City Chiefs versus the Denver Broncos. The Chiefs won 16-14. The Chiefs' leading passer is Patrick Mahomes, who had 266 passing yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher is Kareem Hunt, who had 35 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Kareem Hunt, who had 65 receiving yards. And then for the Broncos, their leading passer is Bo Nix, who had 215 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Audric Estime, who had 53 rushing yards, and their leading receiver was Courtland Sutton, who had 70 receiving yards and a touchdown. So this is a game the Broncos should have won. They got the field goal blocked at the end, and the Chiefs didn't play that great. You know what the Chiefs are reminding me of is last year's Eagles and 2 years ago Vikings, where the Vikings 2 years ago, you can say this is a bad team. They play bad. And, well, honestly, I'd lump the Vikings and Eagles together. And last year's Eagles and 2 years ago's Vikings, where you can see these two are both bad teams that are not playing well and somehow get lucky enough to win. It's kind of unexplainable because the Chiefs are really not playing well. Their defense is playing decent, but Patrick Mahomes isn't playing well. And just overall, it just doesn't seem like they're a good football team. The Broncos should have definitely won this, and just, again, the Chiefs are 9-0, so it's hard to say there should be panic, but the Chiefs certainly just need to be playing better, because guess what happened with the Eagles and the Vikings? Both of them got knocked out in the first round of the playoffs. So it's just going to be tough there. And then with the Broncos, at least Bo Nix is playing pretty decent. That's got to be positive for you. I don't think they're a Super Bowl team, but they're at least a borderline playoff team, and so that's good for them. The next game is the New Orleans Saints versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Saints won 20-17. The Saints' leading passer is Derek Carr, who had 269 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Alvin Kamara, who had 55 rushing yards. And their leading receiver is Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who had 109 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. And then for the Falcons, their leading passer is Kirk Cousins, who had 306 yards and an interception. Their leading rusher is Bijan Robinson, who had 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. And their leading receiver is Drake London, who had 97 receiving yards. This is another game the Falcons should have won. They missed 3 field goals, which were absolutely terrible. Shouldn't have happened. And overall, I do think the Falcons outplayed the Saints. But the Saints were quite shocking. Their defense played really well, even though they probably should have lost. And then Marquez Valdes-Scantling. This is kind of what I've said previously and why he really hasn't worked out in the sense where he does occasionally struggle with drops, but he basically runs one route. It kind of reminds me a little bit of a Jameson Williams. Just run a streak, you're very fast, and he's going to throw it up to you, and the quarterback's going to throw it up to you. And that's basically all you do. And it worked, and that's why I didn't think Marquez Valdes-Scantling should have been out of the NFL so quickly. But overall, the Saints, their season's probably done, even though it sucks for them because it feels like if Derek Carr didn't get injured, who knows what would have happened to them. But he got injured, but Falcons, they're still probably going to be a playoff team. And just Kirk Cousins just needs to protect the ball and play better, and their kicker just needs to stop missing field goals, plain and simple. The next game is the San Francisco 49ers versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The 49ers won 23-20. The 49ers' leading passer was Brock Purdy, who had 353 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Christian McCaffrey, who had 39 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Jawan Jennings, who had 93 receiving yards. And for the Buccaneers, their leading passer was Baker Mayfield, who had 116 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Bucky Irving, who had 73 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Rachaad White, who had 39 receiving yards and a touchdown. To say about this game is Christian McCaffrey's back, which he didn't really look like himself, although he had one really amazing catch. And then it's shocking to have the Buccaneers stay in this. It kind of reminds me of earlier in the season, who am I thinking of? The team where the Rams. It reminds me of the Rams early in the season where Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp were injured, but they kept staying close in games. And that's where the Buccaneers are, where Chris Godwin's injured, Mike Evans injured, and somehow they're staying close in these games. And overall, if you're the Buccaneers, even though they did not play well, they played well enough to stay in it, and you gotta be happy with that. And then, kind of like what I said about the Falcons, they got to stop missing field goals, the 49ers. That nearly cost them the game right here, and that's really going to become an issue come playoffs, is who's got the best kicker and whose kicker is going to cost them. Because I'll mention later on with the Jets kicker really screwed them this year. The next game is the Los Angeles Chargers versus the Tennessee Titans. The Chargers won 27-17. The Chargers' leading passer is Justin Herbert, who had 164 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Gus Edwards, who had 55 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Ladd McConkey, who had 52 receiving yards. And the Titans, their leading passer was Will Levis, who had 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Tajay Spears, who had 47 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Calvin Ridley, who had 84 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. So this game, Justin Herbert played pretty well. He's been kind of a little bit of a non-factor in the sense that this is what Jim Harbaugh likes to do. He did it at Michigan of J.J. McCarthy. He did it with the 49ers of Colin Kaepernick. He's basically like, ignore the quarterback. Hopefully you don't make mistakes. We're just going to have a strong rushing game and a good defense. And I think it's good in the sense that they do have a quarterback that is capable of passing when they need him to. But it is kind of interesting to me that Justin Herbert really feels like adding tons to this team. And I'm curious if they can maybe trade him for quite a few picks or not. And then the Titans, I think it is too early to give up on Will Levis because Will Levis hasn't played that bad this year. The issue with him is basically he has one of the most idiotic plays a game. One of those plays a game. And if he can clean up that one play, then he doesn't look like an absolute terrible quarterback. And so I do think it is too early to give up on Will Levis. I think they should at least give him another year. And we'll just see. But the Titans are kind of becoming a disaster, and the Chargers are really looking good and on the rise. The next game is the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Dallas Cowboys. The Eagles won 34-6. The Eagles' leading passer is Jalen Hurts, who had 202 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Their leading rusher was Saquon Barkley, who had 66 rushing yards. And their leading receiver is A.J. Brown, who had 109 receiving yards. And for the Cowboys, their leading passer is Cooper Rush, who had 45 passing yards. Their leading rusher is Rico Dowdle, who had 53 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Jake Ferguson, who had 24 receiving yards. And Cooper Rush had 45 passing yards. So, the Cowboys season is over. Plain and simple. I don't know if they fire Mike McCarthy. Here's the thing. He hasn't been a bad coach. I think they've just got unlucky this year of injuries. Like, Dak's done for the year. DeMarcus Lawrence got injured. Micah Parsons got injured. Basically, that's what they did, is they put all their money into a few star players, and now these star players are getting injured and not playing. And that's why I think it was kind of a mistake to pay Dak Prescott all that money. Just because, number one, I don't know if he's worth it or not. He might be, he might not be. But the big problem is they effectively had an option after this year of what do we do? Do we still want to be a playoff team? Do we want to rebuild? What do we want to do? And they kind of did a halfway thing where it's like they're going to keep all the pieces but get worse because they have no running game. But they don't really want to rebuild because they paid Dak and CD a lot of money. And it's just a tough situation for the Cowboys, and I don't really know if there's a good solution. Honestly, with them, I'd probably keep everything the same and just hopefully you get lucky in the draft. Just because their issue is their division, too, is the Commanders now look really good. The Eagles are decent. The Giants are terrible. They don't have to worry about the Giants, but it's just tough. I don't know really if there's a good solution for the Cowboys, but I think their season is over. And then for the Eagles, they just keep on winning, and they looked really good again in this game, and they've been playing pretty good all season, and they just kind of need to keep up what they're doing, and Jalen Hurts has looked great. The next game is the Arizona Cardinals versus the New York Jets. The Cardinals won 31-6. The Cardinals' leading passer was Kyler Murray, who had 266 yards and 1 touchdown. Their leading rusher was Trey Benson, who had 62 rushing yards, and their leading receiver was James Conner, who had 80 receiving yards. And for the Jets, their leading passer was Aaron Rodgers, who had 151 passing yards. Their leading rusher was Breece Hall, who had 52 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Garrett Wilson, who had 41 receiving yards. So this is tough. I'll first start on the Cardinals. It is very interesting with the Cardinals because they seem like every single one of their games, their offense either plays absolutely perfect and looks like probably the best offense in the NFL, or it completely collapses and they're absolutely terrible. And it's just hard to explain because nothing's different. And I think their head coach, Jonathan Gannon, needs to get a lot of credit because nobody on their defense is really superstars except for Budda Baker, and their defense is playing really, really great. And then for the Jets, their season's probably over. Here's the deal. They need to get 9-8. So effectively, with their... Hold on, give me one second. Let me pull up their schedule. So with their remaining games, they can only lose one game. They need to be... give me one second. They can only lose one game, and that's a problem. Right now, they're 3-7, and they need to be 5-1 for their remaining games. And their schedule is a little bit tough. Okay, they have the Colts, who they should be able to beat, but could be tough. They have the Seahawks, who, again, I think they should beat, but will be tough. The Dolphins, who knows what they have in the Dolphins, because they're kind of off and on, but I think they are actually pretty good and are turning a corner. They have the Jaguars, who are terrible, and the Jets should beat. The Rams, who are kind of off and on again, but I think the Rams are pretty decent. They have the Bills, who are great, but depending on where it lands in the schedule, the Bills might want to bench their players if they have the division and maybe the whole conference locked up. And then they have the Dolphins again in the final game of the season. Can they effectively be 5-1 in those games? That's going to be very tough because it feels like the only for sure win against a bad team you have is the Jaguars. So then that poses the question, what do? Obviously, they need to hire a new head coach. And the question is Aaron Rodgers. Does he want to return? Because this is my thoughts on it. Is I thought if they won the Super Bowl, Aaron Rodgers is 100% retiring. If they came close to the Super Bowl, like lost in the divisional round or the championship, or maybe they lost in the Super Bowl, then Aaron Rodgers would come back for another year. At this point, they are struggling a lot. The offense seems very basic and doesn't include a lot of motion, and I think that part of the blame does belong to Aaron Rodgers because he does like this classic Mike McCarthy offense and doesn't really want to like revolutionize and modernize his offense. And I don't think he's playing that bad. I think they've also just gotten really unlucky because they've lost something like 4 or 5 games because their kicker missed the game-winning field goal. And so it's tough because, yeah, it's either blow it all up or maybe come back for another year of Aaron Rodgers. I think Aaron Rodgers will probably come back for another year just because I don't think he wants this to be his final season if he can help it. But really, who knows? The Jets are just in trouble. Their defense is not playing well up to standards, and their offense is struggling quite a bit, and I don't think there's really any good solution for them. So I think you just have to hope next year a new head coach, maybe some new players can fix it, but we'll see. It's kind of all eyes on Rodgers if he's going to retire or not. Who knows? If you want me to bet money on it, I think probably not, because he's not been playing that bad in sense of like Peyton Manning's final year. He was like, okay, this is so horrible. Peyton Manning has to retire because he just can't do it anymore. Aaron Rodgers has not been that level of bad. He's not been his MVP form, but he's not been terrible. And so he clearly can still do it. I just don't know if he wants to or not, because again, the offensive line is also struggling and playing terrible, and he's getting hit a lot, and he's getting injured, it feels like almost every game. But who knows, because also the issue is his personal life kind of thing, or Tom Brady. It felt like he wanted to play football forever, but he was kind of forced into retirement by his family because he wanted to spend time with his family and being with his family. Whereas Aaron Rodgers, he doesn't really have a wife, he doesn't have any kids, so yeah, just who knows what's going on. But the Jets are in major, major trouble right now. The next game is the Detroit Lions versus the Houston Texans. The Lions won 26-23. Their leading passer was Jared Goff, who had 240 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Jahmyr Gibbs, who had 71 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Sam Laporta, who had 66 receiving yards and a touchdown. And then the Texans, their leading passer was C.J. Stroud, who had 232 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Joe Mixon, who had 46 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was John Mechie, who had 74 receiving yards and a touchdown. So about this game, I can't believe Jared Goff threw 5 interceptions and still won the game. That is insane to me and very shocking. The CJ Stroud didn't play well, Jared Goff didn't play well, but the Lions proved that they could win without Jared Goff. And that's kind of the interesting thing about it is I feel like overall this season Jared Goff really hasn't been a factor for the Lions in the sense look at the past 2 weeks. Their defense basically won it for them against the Packers with that Kirby Joseph pick six. And then their special teams won it against the Titans the week before, and they've basically been winning without Jared Goff, and Jared Goff just hasn't been making any mistakes to lose them the game. And now he made mistakes to lose them the game, and they still won. So I think that is very positive in the sense that, like I said, Jared Goff really hasn't been the reason they've been winning, but he definitely has not been the reason they lost or been playing bad. And so it's interesting when he has a bad game, they still win. And just the Texans, they're really on the downturn. Their offensive line is struggling a lot. The Lions really stopped Joe Mixon, and overall, just a great game by the Lions. And then also, it's kind of interesting that Zadarius Smith, they gave him a week of rest, which I just found interesting because I don't think he played last week against the Browns either. I might be wrong about that. So that's 2 weeks off. And to me, it was just one of those things where it's like, this could have been a really great game for him because of how terrible the Texans' offensive line is. And it does bother me a little bit because shouldn't Zadarius Smith want to play for the Lions? Like even if they even have him on a snap count because he doesn't really know the defense, just have him rush the passer on like third downs and stuff like that. I don't know. That was just weird to me, and it feels like his heart might not be in it or something. But he's the problem is that he was basically the only option they had left. They had no good options at edge rusher because all of the good edge rushers are already on a team. So I don't know. That was just weird to me. But overall, the Lions gotta be happy with a win, even though you played terrible. And then the Texans, they're just keep going down and down and down, and there's no real solutions to it. Because this is what I said. C.J. Stroud, he played great for a rookie, but in the grand scheme of things, his season wasn't that great. And now he's kind of taken all that hype because of how great he played for a rookie, and really hasn't played that great yet. And I'm not saying you should give up on him. No, you definitely shouldn't. It's way too early in his career. But he definitely is struggling quite a lot. And the final game of the week is the Miami Dolphins versus the Los Angeles Rams. The Dolphins won 23-15. The Dolphins' leading passer was Tua, who had 207 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Devon Achane, who had 37 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Jalen Waddle, who had 57 receiving yards. And then the Rams, their leading passer was Matthew Stafford, who had 293 passing yards and an interception. Their leading rusher was Kyren Williams, who had 62 rushing yards, and their leading receiver was Puka Nacua, who had 98 receiving yards. Overall, both teams played fine. Like this, I hate to say this, kind of a nothing game in the sense that the Dolphins are probably out of the playoffs, and the Rams, they're still in it, and their division's tough, but neither team played great, and neither team played horrible. That's kind of the gist of it in the sense that no one showed that much in the sense saying, wow, that was really a great, amazing play. And then no one really was like, that was terrible. And then one thing I do have to mention is Tyreek Hill, I guess, got injured during the celebration. And I just think it's so stupid. I'm not saying the NFL should ban these celebrations or penalize these celebrations, but I think as a team, you got to start cracking down on these. Because I remember that happened a few years ago where Lamar Jackson got injured because it screwed me in fantasy, where he got injured doing a flip into the end zone. And I just keep thinking, number one, all these elaborate celebrations, how much practice time is devoted to celebrations as opposed to actual practice of football? And then number two, now you have players getting injured during the celebration. It's just stupid. But overall, I think if you're the Dolphins, you gotta be happy with a win. And then the Rams, you just can't afford to lose anymore. And so we'll see if the Rams can pull it back and make the playoffs. So that's how it happened in the Week 10 of the NFL season. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you like this type of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button like it owes you money. I'll see you on the next one.